recording. Okay, so this is a middle school and high school literacy professional development. Let's go ahead and jump in. These are our objectives for today. By the end of the session, participants will be able to define pre-teaching and explain the impact it can have on student success, determine which words students need direct vocabulary instruction in before starting a unit or a lesson. You're going to be able to implement 2 vocabulary strategies to improve vocabulary proficiency. And you're going to understand how fluency practice can improve students' proficiency in reading at the upper elementary all the way through high school, as well as determine parameters for implementing fluency practice effectively in your classroom. Okay, so pre-teaching. Pre-teaching is the process of determining what skills students need to fully access a lesson or a unit in order to demonstrate mastery of that unit. So before COVID was even a thing, we had students in our room who could not fully access the text or the unit or that lesson that day. They had some gaps happening before they could fully access it. And so pre-teaching targets what they need for that particular lesson or that particular unit so that they can fully access it, okay? The justification for this is an innovation that is supported with strong empirical evidence to have a strong impact on student success. When intervening after a lesson, so if a student goes through the lesson and you look at the exit tickets at the end and they didn't do well, when intervening after that lesson, the student has already struggled and feels defeated. This innovation is intended to prevent that from happening in the first place. Pre-teaching is especially effective for ELs and students with exceptionalities or disabilities, but it is a great research-based practice to implement and impact any group of students. Pre-teaching can occur as a whole group. It can occur with all your students in the classroom at the same time, or it can also be run as small groups of students depending on the need. So if you have a class coming to you and none of them have any idea about this particular skill you need for that day, you might take the first 10 minutes as a pre-teach to teach everybody. Say that you've been going through the lessons and it's further into the unit, and this particular lesson this day might be on key details, and you notice that your students with IEPs are really the ones that need that. You might facilitate that one more as a small group and have the whole rest of the class working on something else. So let's dive into vocabulary instruction first. So vocabulary as a part of pre-teaching, as texts become more complex, vocabulary can be a big contributor of whether students are able to read and comprehend that text. As teachers, it's vital to preview all the texts that we teach from to determine what vocabulary are essential to understanding the content. So the first bullet, vocabulary, there's usually 3, depending on the research person, there's 3 to 5 things that strongly impact reading comprehension. All of them agree that vocabulary strongly impacts reading comprehension. And I was an instructional coach for 5 years. I've taught middle school ELA, middle school social studies. I've coached grades kindergarten through 9th grade. All my teachers in ELA were always like, Natalie, what can we do to improve reading comprehension? Vocabulary is one of those key levers that can really help to impact their reading comprehension piece. Okay, that's why we're diving into that today. We can use our own teacher knowledge of our students to determine what words students may need more instruction on, or we can consult the first lesson for units and guidebooks to develop an understanding of the unit concepts as well. I'm going to take you through both of those scenarios. So vocabulary instruction in guidebooks. This particular little snippet at the bottom comes from slide 2 of lesson 1 of A Christmas Carol. All of our guidebooks units kind of start where they have these vocabulary that are essential to the unit at the very beginning of the unit. Sometimes they even happen midway through if there's another concept that they're adding or layering on. As a teacher, we're going to look at these words to determine which words students probably don't have a complete understanding of and are essential to understanding the unit. As well as looking for words that lend themselves to teaching about morphology. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So if I'm looking through these words, and I've only typically taught at schools that are 100% free lunch, high percentage of students with disabilities, high percentage of English language learners. At my last school, there was 15 languages spoken. So their context of what we're reading about, they didn't always have context for it, right? But even then, looking at happy and happier and happiness, most of my kids pretty much knew about that. At the very least, when I'm going through the unit, I might make it a teachable moment and say, oh my goodness, he's so happy again here. What does that really mean? I might not need direct and explicit instruction on that word, right? But I'm going through the list. Consumer, consumption, consuming, that's probably one I need to target because they probably don't have a whole lot of context around that one. Satisfy, satisfaction is another one that may or may not, that might be more of a small group one. Some of my kids might have context for that word. Reflect and reflected is something they might have context with, but as a teacher, I know that this particular unit, that's a main theme that happens throughout, the reflection that's happening throughout. And so that probably is one I'm going to have, it's a high leverage word in this unit, so I'm going to have direct explicit instruction on that one. And then value or valuable. So you're kind of just using your own teacher knowledge of your kids, of the unit, to really discuss which ones do you need direct and explicit instruction on. You know, the scope of our units happens pretty quickly and we have a lot of content to get through. So we can't necessarily teach 20 words this way on day one, but you want to really look for those high leverage words that if the students have a firm understanding of it, it's going to really impact their ability to read about it, write about it, and discuss it. Okay. So the two vocabulary strategies we're talking about this morning are direct and explicit vocabulary instruction and morphology. And we're going to jump into morphology first. So morphology and how it applies to middle and high school. For those of you that are not familiar, morphology is defined as a system of units of meaning and words. And this comes from Jones-Sedita. Morphemes consist of a base and an affix, which is a prefix or a suffix. Teachers at the secondary level are not often equipped to remediate reading, but developing our knowledge around morphology can help with reading fluency and vocabulary comprehension so that students read and understand their content area text better. Morphology is a high leverage strategy because it not only helps them understand that particular word, but it also helps them understand all the words that have those word parts in them. As well as it talks about fluency. If students hear con, see what con means, see con in multiple words, this adds their fluency as they start to see words with con in them. And that's just one example. There's multiple different examples that would apply to. Morphemes are the smallest units of meaning. Some words have one morpheme, like play and show and build, and others have multiple morphemes, like reconstructing and deconstruction have 4. Okay, so re is a prefix, con is a prefix, struct is a base, and ing is a suffix. So just learning those 4 word parts, students can then apply those 4 different word parts to multiple different words. Morphemes provide students with numerous strategies for decoding, the ability to see a word or letters and understand what that says, as well as encoding, their ability to spell proficiently, as well as enhancing vocabulary. As children learn the common prefixes, suffixes, and Latin and Greek bases, they gain new understanding of these meaning-based building blocks in English words. So this, for those of you that have never seen this before, this is what's called Scarborough's reading rope. And Scarborough is an expert in how we learn to read. There have been so many studies recently, hundreds of thousands of studies across the world that really kind of looked into our brain to see how we read. And they broke it up into 2 main principles. We have a language comprehension piece and we have a word recognition piece. And as these 2 intertwine, they produce what's called a skilled reader. Okay. And so most of the time, our hat in middle school and in high school lays in that upper strand, language comprehension. We hope they come to us with word recognition, even though we know that's not always the case. But it's always our job to further develop that upper part of the rope, the background knowledge, the vocabulary, all these different things up here. Morphemes play an exceptional role because they live in both parts. So again, they're a high leverage strategy to helping students become a more skilled reader. Okay, so the importance of teaching morphological awareness. It improves all these different things: vocabulary comprehension, reading aloud, their ability to read aloud, their ability to spell, phonological awareness, which builds up awareness of speech sounds. And if you have students in your room who have dyslexia or any kind of processing issues, they struggle because their phonological awareness is not as developed as somebody who doesn't have that. And so this really helps them too, as well as reading comprehension. The most exciting thing is all students benefit from morphology instruction in your classroom. And so we have all these different needs happening. You know, sometimes we have master and advanced students in the same classroom with unsatisfactory basic students. And so morphology instruction helps the average performing student, English learners, students who need literacy support, as well as advanced students. And so when your pre-teaching block becomes more of a small group-based thing, you can take morphology and really structure it for those students' needs in particular. So your advanced students, you could have working on more advanced morphemes, and your students who are English learners might be learning more basic morphemes. Okay, so it really allows you to tailor to what your kids need. The most common activity in middle and high for teaching morphology is what's called a word matrix. And Jordan is sharing with y'all the PowerPoint presentation. I have a ton of links in here so that y'all can access as you're going through your lessons. Down here at the bottom, pre-made word matrices can be found here at Morpheme Matrices. They have tons of pre-made ones. They have blank templates for you to make your own, but that's all there for you. You want to select the number of morphemes you would like to teach, and you want to use explicit instructions that follow when teaching. I'm going to walk through that next. It's really important. I think in middle and high, we assume that students don't need as much, maybe that direct model. We want them to be more independent. And students, a lot of students have not had fluid practice with this. So they really need to see what it looks and sounds like before they're doing it independently on their own. Okay, so explicit instructions for teaching these matrices. The first thing you want to do is you want to explain the purpose of not just this activity, but anytime you start an activity and you don't connect it or root it to something else, students don't know where that belongs. And so sometimes they don't anchor that in their brains and they kind of let it go. So anchor that somewhere. There are many big or long words in newspapers, magazines, books, job ads, and on the internet, guys. They often include word parts, or what we call morphemes. These are prefixes, roots, and suffixes. So today we're going to learn about how to combine or assemble them and figure out their meanings and their uses so that you can read more words on your own. The very first thing I want to do as a teacher is I want to model the pronunciation of the Latin root, and I want to read its simple meaning. And I'm going to show you that on the next slide. Then you're going to model how to assemble only free Latin roots and suffixes. If they've never seen morphology ever in their little lives, you want to start kind of basic and then build, okay? So freestanding Latin roots are words that can stand on their own. These are words like play and show. It's not struct. Struct can't be its own word. It has to have a prefix or a suffix to function, okay? And you want to add those together to make new words. You want to discuss the meanings and changes, how the word changes as you add the different parts. And then you can model different, increase the complexity of it. Then you can model the pronunciation of prefixes and read their simple meanings, or pronounce, define, and assemble one at a time. Then you can model how to assemble prefixes, Latin roots, to make new words, and then assemble prefixes, Latin roots, and suffixes. So you're kind of building the complexity of that. You want to guide students in rereading the word after you assemble it, spelling the word, and using the new word in an oral sentence. So this is just you doing direct and explicit instruction before you even release them to do matrices. Then you want to have the students write a few sentences and share them with the group or a partner. The word matrices activity that I'm sharing with you even has a spot for them to write the words from the matrix, and then a spot at the bottom to write the sentences. So this is the layout of a general word matrices. The Latin root goes in the very middle with its simple meaning. And it's up to you whether you, the teacher, want to write whether it's free or bound. I don't think that's essential to understanding that, but if you think you do, then you can go ahead and do that. In the upper left-hand corner are your common prefixes. These form new words and change meaning, are part of speech, okay? Then you have some less common prefixes. They form new words and change meaning, or word parts of speech too, but these aren't, so re would be a very common prefix, okay? Your most common inflectional suffixes go in the upper right-hand corner. These change the noun number or verb tense. This is when you add an S, an ED, and ING. And then you have a common derivational suffix that form new words and may change part of speech. So here's an example of one. This is a morpheme matrix with the base form, which means to shape. It's a freestanding one. The word form can be a word on its own. Okay, but now we're going to go ahead and practice forming new words. And I got to back out of the presentation to show you this. This is something that was especially helpful during COVID when we were doing like virtual teaching, but you can still do it this way in your classroom. I just make little text boxes with the different words so we can manipulate them on the Promethean. If you want to write this on a whiteboard, that is perfectly fine. You don't have to do this. This is just one way. If you're a techie person, you can. Okay, so form means to shape. Let's make some new words using the base form. Okay, so if I add in the front of form, it becomes inform. Okay, and this is to give or shape knowledge, to give or shape knowledge. Okay, and I would have them say the word with me. I would have them I would use it in a sentence and then have them use it in a sentence. And then I would build to them using suffixes with this word as well. Okay, so that's just one example. So if we look back on our guidebooks example from a few minutes ago, one of the words was reflecting. Okay, this was a good one to use for morphology because it has a base and affixes in it. Okay, so I would tell them reflecting. Reflecting is a word, y'all say it with me, reflecting. And then I would tell them, okay, here's your prefix, re. Re means again, to do again. Flect means to bend. And ing is the action of the process of doing something. So if I'm putting that together, this is the process of bending again, and something that applies to is memories. We can kind of go through and remember things and bend our thoughts to go back and remember again what these things mean. I'm reflecting again. And we're going to talk about in this story how his memories bend and shape who he is again and again and again, the process of, okay? That's just one example. So if morphology can't be done, if they're not word parts, but you still need students to really know and understand that word, apply that word, be able to analyze that word, evaluate that word, direct and explicit vocabulary instruction is the next leg of vocabulary. And there's lots of different vocabulary strategies. These are just two, but these are two that I found that have a lot of leverage, okay? Sometimes words don't lend themselves, like I said, to that morphology instruction. That's when this instruction is needed. This particular strategy is part of our content literacy series. I'm going to show you that before we get off together. Okay, so direct instruction refers to the teacher's ability to directly provide instruction to the student through teacher-led discussion and actions. This is not yet where we're eliciting responses. This is not where we're having turn and talks. This is where I need you to really understand what this is. Now I'm going to release you, talk about it after we give them direct explicit instruction. Explicit refers to the process of delivering the instruction so that the steps and process of instruction are crystal clear in their heads before we release them. This includes a model and a think aloud, okay? The steps are literally highlighted so that students know exactly how to arrive back at that answer in a second. Torkelson in 2004 described explicit instruction as instruction that does not leave anything to chance and does not make assumptions about skills and knowledge that children will acquire on their own. We're giving it to them, and then we're letting them manipulate that. Direct and explicit vocabulary instruction in action. Okay, so if I was doing this and I have my word up, this is another word from this unit, Christmas Carol, okay, the word's tenement. I would walk in and say, good morning, class. Today, we're going to focus on really learning some of our vocabulary words in this unit so that you can better understand what we are reading and discussing as we learn. Our first word today is tenement. Tenement is a noun and it is Middle English. It means the holding of property, the property so held, building, or dwelling. And it's borrowed from the Anglo-French. It's borrowed from medieval Latin, tenementum, and you can go through and read the rest of those, tenementium, from Latin tenere, to hold, occupy, or possess. Okay, this comes from Merriam-Webster. Now, pause. Some of you may say, oh my goodness, my students don't need all that. What I'm allowing you to see is the more things you can tell them about that word, the more things they're going to be able to anchor it to in their heads, the better chance you have them retaining that and being imprinted into their words in their orthographic mapping of being a word that you view, understand, and can apply meaning to. As you start doing this, they're going to start to understand better parts of speech. Initially, students, when they come to us, really don't understand truly, mine didn't, what a noun, a verb, an adjective, all those things were, maybe basically, but not really. And they're going to start to understand where words come from. That's very important because we don't even know this. As we read words, we apply different spelling patterns to them. And those spelling patterns are actually determined by where they derive from, okay? Whether they're Latin, Greek, Anglo-French, Anglo-Saxon, those things matter. So as you start doing this practice, those kind of things help. There are more things for the kids to anchor to. Okay, so I told them that, I told them the definition, I told them where it came from, what part of speech it is. Now you say tenement, and my class would say tenement back to me. So in my own words now, a tenement is a place where people live, typically an apartment in our context that we're going to read about, okay? Now let's look at some pictures and other examples of tenements. Okay, then I would have this slide up. So again, a tenement is a dwelling or a place where people live. Here are two pictures of tenements, okay? The one on the right-hand side is probably a tenement from the period that we're reading about. And here's our sentence from the text. Down the block, there was an old tenement that had been abandoned for some months. And this comes from the Treasure of Lemon Brown that we're about to read, okay? So these are some examples of tenement. Now, say the word tenement again. Write the word tenement in your notebook. I want you to write your definition of the word tenement, and now write a sentence with the word tenement. And depending on the needs of your students, you might have some turn and talks here because they might not be able to remember what you said the definition was. Maybe they needed time to talk it out again. And they might need time to kind of come up with a sentence together with more than just themselves. Just look at the needs of your class to determine what other scaffolds they need in between there. If you have students who need additional support in your classroom, it would be best to hand this out as a template that they simply fill in. You can even include sentence stems to have an additional layer of support. So if you have an inclusion class, if you have a high number of students with disabilities or English language learners, something like that might be more beneficial than just giving them a blank sheet of loose leaf or copy paper and saying, okay, write this down, because they need more structure and support than that. Okay. So now I would pause to, ask if you have any questions. I know y'all are in a whole group big setting. So if you have any questions as you go, facilitators, feel free to type in the chat. I'm happy to answer now or when the presentation is coming to a close. Okay.
Any questions? We can type them in the chat.
Sorry.
So I'll just be looking for those as we go. I'll give y'all another couple of seconds in case you do. Okay, so we talked about vocabulary, okay, and what difference that makes. Another thing that really impacts students' ability to read and comprehend is their level of fluency. What is their ability to look at these words, read the words quickly, and keep on going and apply meaning to the words as they go? That's the most important part. We don't want them to be able to just read the sentence and say it out loud, but not know what the sentence means, right? So fluency is another high leverage strategy. All right, got it. The National Reading Panel in 2000 defined reading fluency as the ability to read text with the appropriate rate. So that means how quickly or slowly we read it. Accuracy, are they accurately reading the word? And prosody. And prosody means the inflection and expression we use, the pauses we make as we're reading. Okay. Reading fluency depends on well-developed word recognition skills that are acquired through systematic explicit instruction and phonemic and phonological awareness in phonics, and strong language comprehension skills also support reading fluency. So this is the part that I talk about in middle and high, this word recognition strand. We hope they come to us with this developed. That being said, we know that that is not always the case, and that's going to be less of the case as kids come to us. Those kids that missed kindergarten first and or second in COVID are going to have bigger gaps with their ability to recognize and decode words. So in middle and high, it's our job to kind of look and see, okay, they really are recognizing most of the words, at least basic words, and they may need some fluency practice, being exposed to, hearing, reading more of the words that we're using at this level of text, okay? There's a strong correlation between reading fluency and reading comprehension, and that's because fluent reading allows students to take the focus off of decoding and deciphering the words and allows them to focus on extracting meaning instead. If you've had a student and you've asked them to read aloud and they're going, there is a strong correlation, they're not able to attend to the meaning of those words. They are so, their brain power is so focused, their mental capacity is so focused on deciphering what the words even say to be able to focus on what the words mean. So fluency is one way to help kind of build that. Okay, so again, here Scarborough's reading rope. Reading fluency is another one that just lives in all strands of the rope. You can develop fluency within all of these different things. Fluency impacts all of these things. So it's another high leverage thing that we can be using during our pre-teaching block. The first step in helping with fluency is a fluency screener. If you've never given a fluency screener, assessing a student's fluency allows you as the teacher to see the accuracy and the rate a student possesses when they're reading text. It refers to how many words correct the student is reading and how fast or slow. We want students to read at the appropriate rate of speech, which is fast enough to gather meaning, but not too fast because meaning may be missed then as well. If students are power reading through something, they're probably missing some meaning there as well. When screening, teachers are able to determine if students are missing certain words, and we can detect certain patterns. So I'm going to show you this in a second, but if they miss the same words with the same parts in them, or if they're missing multisyllabic words all the time, this tells us things, and we can do different things within our instruction to kind of leverage that and improve that. The fluency screener tells teachers if the student is a fluent reader or if gaps exist in the student's code knowledge or word recognition skills. So the first part of the LIFT diagnostic, I'm going to show you where that's at, is a fluency screener titled Quest for the Best, and it can be found in our administration materials as well as the student recording packet. And there's also an advanced fluency passage titled The French Quarter, and this one might be more appropriate for your students in grades 6 through 12. Unless you already know this is a really struggling reader, I would still administer Quest for the Best. Okay, you'll need only one administration materials packet, but you'll need a student recording packet for each and every student that you're administering the diagnostic to. Okay, the fluency probe is the first step in diagnosing what support students may need who are not performing at benchmark. Okay, let me take y'all to that real quick, just so y'all can kind of see. So this is our literacy library. Jordan definitely knows how to access that, so I'll have her share that with you. But all of our resources that I'm sharing with you today, the first one, the direct and explicit vocabulary instruction, that can be found here in instruction, intervention, and extensions, the second pillar. And they're all here, all these different things. So direct and explicit vocab was here, but there's annotating, creating a claim, independent reading, partner reading, reading and writing for a purpose, summary writing to develop comprehension, using rubrics, using student exemplars, whole class read alouds, and writing frames. Okay, there's direct and explicit instruction on each and every one of these. This is what the direct and explicit vocab instruction looks like, the one that we used together already this morning. It shows you when it would apply to each of the different content areas, who it could support, the purpose of the support, communicating that purpose, and a very detailed process, step by step, on exactly what to do when you're implementing this particular thing. It also talks about additional considerations, and these are usually for your students who need more support in your class and what you can do with this support with them. So that's where that content literacy library is. If we go back, or even on the side, the thing that I'm referring to right now for fluency is this Lift Kit library. It's a little brain doing the work with the, so this is where we're going to go. Okay, and this is what I'm referring to when we start fluency practice. They have an administration materials packet and they have a student recording packet. Okay, so we only need one administration material packet for ourselves. We need one recording packet for each student that we do. Okay, so you just, y'all can see, this is what it looks like. It has like a little flow chart, which I'm not going to go into all that for the purposes of today's session. Here is our passage, Quest for the Best. Okay, this is what the kids would be reading from. And here's the passage I was talking about that's more probably appropriate for our 6th to 12th grade students, the French Quarter. Okay, that's where that is. And let's jump back into our presentation. Okay, so as students, and it gives you very explicit instructions for how to do this. I'm also going to show you a recording I did. In middle school, we don't have a lot of practice where we administer fluency screeners. We don't know how to code them or what necessarily to do. The directions recommend giving up to 3 minutes to read this, but I'm going to tell you, if you're in a time crunch because you just need some data, you can do 1 minute per student to already get a good idea of how they read, with their fluency rated, like their rate, their accuracy rate. And it tells you how to calculate that too. 1 minute per student, and you can have one done for each student in your different classes. Okay. So After you administer the fluency screener for students, and there's a norms chart in there, and it says the students score at the 90th percentile, they're reading this many words correct per minute. If they're reading at the 75th percentile, it's this many words correct per minute for grade level. For students above that 50th percentile, students would benefit from fluency practice. Okay, we're going to talk more about that. Students below the 50th percentile would benefit from further screening. And there's other screening pieces in there. You can either do those or not do those. But for today's purposes, we're just talking about the kids. Most of your kids are going to be above the 50th percentile and are going to benefit from this extra fluency practice. Okay. Most of the ELA curricula have fluency passages that can be used for further practice that also relate to the topic or covered in that unit of study. And so Guidebooks has this. Their curriculum hub has these fluency passages available, which not only help us improve fluency, but build that background knowledge around the topic as well. And they can be found by clicking on the grade level, the desired unit 01, and then fluency tasks is what they're called when you click on those folders to access your different documents from Guidebooks. Achieve the Core also has a thorough process to follow for more fluency practice, as well as a huge library of fluency passages sorted by genre, and resources can be found for that. And I'm going to share, like I said, this presentation, so you can just click on the links and access those. And then additional high school fluency support and passages can be found at the Ohio Literacy Alliance as well. So fluency work really needs to be done. If you're administering a screener, it really has to be done one-on-one. If you're doing fluency practice, it can be done in a small group. Fluency, you can help fluency when you're doing a read aloud as a teacher as a whole group, but that's not really direct and explicit instruction in fluency. So it really needs to happen in a small group environment, okay? It should include walking students through previewing the text first, okay? So if the text, like just showed you the screeners, here's the title, here's our text, here's some pictures, modeling how the student should read with the appropriate rate and prosody. So before they start reading it, I should model what the appropriate rate and prosody is. Remember, rate is how fast or how slow. Prosody is that inflection piece that we have, the pausing at punctuation, those kind of things. Where necessary, you probably need to explain prosody. So you might be reading and say, okay, I paused at this comma because a comma indicates a pause. It's going to another idea, okay? It might not be as big of a difference in idea because we're not using a period, but there's another shift maybe here, okay? It's going to help them use punctuation better. It's also going to help them read more fluently. Moving through a progression of scaffolds after modeling, such as echo reading and choral reading before students are asked to read independently. So echo reading is where I read a sentence and then the student or students read the sentence back to me. Choral reading is when we all read the exact same sentence together at the exact same time. And you can use both of those interchangeably, different ways. Conducting 3 or 4 reads of a passage to ensure students are building their sight word recognition. Each read through should have a different purpose, okay? And purposes could include just practicing reading at that pace or with that expression. It could be answering questions. You know, we don't want to just live just in fluency. We're also helping to develop reading comprehension. Most of the passages from Guidebooks come with comprehension questions at the end. If they don't, you can just throw in a question or two in there just to check for understanding that they understood what they were reading as well. One purpose could be to identify words they don't know. So, okay, we're on the second read. Let's look or the first read. Let's look for words we don't know. And you can talk about those and reflecting on what students learn from the text. So one of the other building blocks of reading comprehension is definitely to be able to summarize or pick out main ideas and key details. That's something you can do within that too. Providing frequent corrective feedback to students as they are reading, helping to pronounce incorrect words. One thing as a middle school ELA teacher that I didn't do a lot of times was I didn't stop students as they were reading to correct them because I didn't want to embarrass them. I didn't want to call them out and say, okay, you're not a good reader, or that was wrong. But through literacy study, it's really important that we do point out how to correctly pronounce something, because if we don't, we're allowing them to incorrectly reinforce the incorrect way to say that. Not just them, but all the students who are listening to them read as well. With that being said, it's really important to build a class culture where that's always safe to do, where we always embrace. I would tell them, I was horrible at spelling on the board sometimes. And I would tell them, okay, bonus points if you let me, Miss Cleaver, know where the misspelled words are, allowing it to be a very safe environment to where people are allowed to make mistakes so that we can all learn better together, and not allowing any student to criticize other students, or, definitely not as a teacher criticizing them for mistakes they made. But it's really important, especially in a small group fluency practice, that they have corrective feedback as they're going, as they're reading. So if they're reading moving to timed and they mispronounce timed, you can say timed and then they can keep reading. We want to reinforce the correct way to say the words. Okay. You want to move to a timed reading eventually so that students can increase their words per minute. So if you're initially screening them with a minute to read as much as they can, you want to eventually say, okay, guys, this is day 5 or this is week 3 or whatever you're doing. I'm going to go ahead and time you today. We're going to do 1 minute and see if your words correct per minute increases. It's so important at the middle and the high level to involve students in this part of the process, because by middle and high, if they're not a great reader, chances are they probably think they're never going to be a great reader. And when you can quantify the words read correct per minute, and they see it grow, that starts to change. They start to have hope that they can become a better reader. So there's all kinds of little trackers I'm going to show you too, where they can start tracking their words correct per minute. One of the best moments I've ever had was a 5th grade ELA, and this little boy was reading. You're supposed to be reading at 80 something or close to 100 words correct per minute. He was reading at 30 at the time, and he got to 50. And there was a whole celebration happening. But those are the kind of moments that we just want. It makes us as a teacher feel really good, and it makes them feel amazing. So, including them in that part of the process where they see their words correct per minute growing is really powerful. Checking for understanding questions as students progress through the readings, and asking students, like I said, to track their progress as they read that passage throughout the week. Okay, next steps. If they're not progressing, if you've been doing this fluency practice with them for a couple of weeks and they're still the exact words correct per minute, then you maybe need to refer them to the school's administration, or we had what's called an SBLC team for next steps, whatever team you have at your school that looks to see what other supports that student may need. Very little or no progress could indicate that students need help with word recognition skills, such as decoding or phonics or phonemic awareness skills even. Okay. Fluent readers in middle and high school will lead to higher proficiency in the content areas, as well as produce lifelong learners, which is our goal. Fluency practice at this level can take as little as 15 minutes per day and make a substantial difference to students. So there are a lot of different resources here for this particular session. I did a middle school and high school PD series, and then I have those both linked right here. Morphology Part 1 really focuses on just more on like what morphology is and where it would fit in your lesson. Morphology Part 2 has lots of different activities besides just the word matrices that you can view if you're looking for more of that. For more information on the direct and explicit vocabulary instruction, I have the actual support that I showed you, but I also did a training video that walks you through a model and exactly how to do it. And you can refer back to that and watch it as many times as you want. For more on fluency practice and support, I did a middle and high school session on that for where fluency lives and more resources on fluency in middle and high. But I also did session 2, how to conduct a fluency screener. Okay. And like I said, this walks you through very step by step on how to score it, how to code it, what the norms chart looks like, how to calculate words correct per minute. It's really easy, but when you don't have any context with it, you don't really know what to do, right? So that's there. And then Achieve the Core is a great resource, like I said, for fluency practice. One thing I don't have in here, and I'm just going to jump back out real quick so you can see in our literacy library. Let me go back. I'm in Lift right now. I showed you the second pillar is instruction, intervention, and extensions. This third pillar, professional growth, is where I have my middle and high school PD series. These are all the slide decks, and these are all the links to see the webinars like we're doing today, okay? But down at the very bottom, there's 2 things. A paraprofessional and support staff PD series kind of shows how we can, if you have a para in your room, it shows how they can be a part of this help. I would really encourage you, the teacher, to be the one doing the screening piece. So we are 100% sure it's accurate and correct, but they can really be a huge piece in helping with the fluency practice and helping facilitate other groups if you have that. And then this block down here at the bottom, this grade 3 through 12 literacy support, is where I show, here's the slide decks again, and below is the recordings. But these first four show how to administer all the pieces of LIFT, which is that fluency screener and some other pieces. And the ones below that show the content literacy series and how to do all of those different ones. So those are there for you if you need any more support in any of those. But we are very, very, very receptive to the field. A lot of our resources are developed because teachers like you have said, hey, we really need this, or we need more information on this. So if you ever have any questions or suggestions, we would love to hear from you at louisianaliteracy@la.gov. And my email is natalie.kleber, and it's spelled Kleibert, @la.gov. If you have anything else, if we can do anything else to help you. But again, sincerest thanks to you and everything you do to help impact our students in Louisiana. I really do. I think you're the glue. So thank you so much for today. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.